Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition for the week. I'm Devin Bedoni.
And I'm Uriel Eisen.
You want to hit us with your quote?
All right. You've got to think about big things while doing small things so that the small things go in the right direction. From Toyota Kata, quote of Alvin Toffler.
I believe so. I don't know. That's how I read it.
You pulled out this quote.
Yeah. The section I've been reading this last week.
Of Toyota Kata.
Yeah.
And this is by Mike Rother.
Yeah. Who's referenced a lot.
Yeah. Written on a number of books.
Yeah.
They're all quite good.
I have not read any of the others yet.
I shouldn't say they're all. I've read a couple of them. I'm maybe not all of them.
Uriel has read every book in the world. This kind of goes straight into one of the things I had here on the list, which is kind of this balance between vision and like the nuts and bolts on the ground. And we've kind of gone back and forth on the podcast and in person or on the phone or whatever many times over things where it's like, well, you can cut it this way and like maybe this is the most important aspect, or you look at it this way and this is the most important aspect.
And you're talking about sort of lean writ large here.
Yeah.
Right?
And
like you can shrink your batches and that's super critical, or lower your inventories, or reduce wasted motion, or...
Yeah. And the example brought up in the book was basically like, bringing in material from... Well, there was several examples. The one that's coming to mind was like bringing in supplier parts. They come in on a crate moved with a forklift. And then so like one of the lean principles is minimize wasted movement. So put it in small containers for the assembly person so that they don't have to move a lot to get the thing while they're doing assembly. But then, the person who's in charge of moving stuff around is like, this is crazy. Now we're like unpacking and repacking this stuff over and over and over again, and we're going back and forth from the big crate to the small crate, right? And it's like, obviously looking at this, at some point you have to make a decision of what you're going to prioritize. And the point brought up in the book is kind of that in these situations, usually what happens is like one person ends up being most compelling, or based on the power structure in the business, they make a decision, or they bring in a consultant who has a strong opinion and a decision is made, but that without a guiding principle, it will end up like going back and forth. At some point, someone else is going to have a different priority and a different decision, and you're just going to kind of like go in circles on these things.
Yeah, I feel like we've all been there. It's like a big meeting where everyone's brainstorming, and the brainstorming, I think we've sort of talked a lot about this. This sort of gets back to like A3,
mm-hmm.
But it's just like whoever has the most compelling concept, and then someone will say, well, that won't work because of this thing, and then maybe that person becomes the most like compelling voice in the room.
Yeah.
And then it sort of just depends when you cut off the meeting of which direction
Exactly.
the company goes.
Yeah.
Until the next meeting where it's like, oh, we learned this from that, and you were right that it's going to be an issue for this department. And
yeah. And the point brought up in the book is that that's where like having a company-wide vision comes into play, where you say, okay, or somebody in the organization says, I see that there's all these conflicting priorities. Our underlying guiding vision says that we do this.
Yeah.
So because of that, figure out how to make this work effectively.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty key.
Like specifically would sort of be like, hey, we are serious about one by one production.
Yeah.
And so your concerns about having to move things into smaller crates are totally valid.
Yeah.
But let's see if we can figure out ways of minimizing the impact of that, because that is the direction overall that we're trying to go.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it really, if you think about the big picture goals and directions,
mm-hmm.
like a good amount and deeply, I feel like there's a lot less wasted time sort of like waffling back and forth on just like things around the shop, because it's sort of, I think it gives sort of a framework. Yeah, I've sort of, on a similar note, been a little bit back and forth, I feel like, on this podcast also, just about the like small improvements versus the big improvements.
Yeah.
And I don't really like framing it as versus exactly. I feel like that quote or the concept of having a bigger vision sort of takes care of a lot of that. But I feel like sometimes I wonder if the focus on like everyone should be improving the company every single day, even if it's just tiny things.
Yeah.
I sort of wonder if that's like just an easy metric in a funny way. Where it's
the
like
everyday part.
Yeah, it's like every day we do 30 minutes of improvements. And it's like, I get that as a practice of it being very visible and it being very tangible and it being very sort of binary. Are we doing this? Are we not doing this?
Yeah.
And so you can be like, we're a lean company. We do 30 minutes of improvements every day. How cool is that? And I just sort of wonder if that sort of misses the point a little bit. Like, I think it's good. I
think it's necessary because we are like creatures of habit, and you have to develop the habit and create space for it.
For sure.
But I think what you're saying is like, that's not the end goal, and you can't let that become the end goal.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And like sometimes like I don't have very many improvements this week because like you had, I feel like last week or 2 weeks ago, where it's like I did this one improvement.
Yeah.
And it's been really hard and there's a lot to it and it's moving in the right direction, but like,
yeah,
I don't know. And I feel like those bigger improvements sometimes that take a lot more energy and require a lot more problems to be solved, like are a much bigger step often, and I don't know, sometimes like a competitive advantage because other people are just scratching the surface of like, sure, we're going to optimize our work cell, but we're not going to like write a custom piece of software so that this repetitive task can sort of be automated or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. So I feel like sometimes the little like, oh, we're just going to improve little ergonomics things or like little like we're going to label containers today for 30 minutes. I think you're right. I think it's good to have a practice. I think it's really critical to make a habit of it and make space and time every single day so it doesn't just get dropped.
Yeah. I think also it might be like, well, there's the lowering the water level concept that we've brought up many times. And then it maybe has like a similarity to cleaning to like find issues.
Right.
Where it's like, yeah, you clean the machine so that you can find the oil leak. And it's like you quote unquote clean your process so you can find the big obstacles.
That's true. I mean, it does lend a lot of clarity when you really simplify things. And then you're like, wait, why are we doing it this way? Like now that I can see this, it's very clear to me.
Wait, you put that there and then you move it over there? Why are we doing this?
That I'm labeling it, we found this writing an SOP. I think like Sam's big insight of like, if it's hard to write the SOP, it might be a bad process.
Yeah. And like I brought up last week, I think just like saying things out loud sometimes even like bringing something forward to discuss, you're like, this is incredibly obvious now that I say it to you all. I had a note on Instagram where someone was like listening to our discussion from last week about me like doing the Chamotic simulator, and they were like, I was about to send you like an angry message, basically, being like, God dang it, give them access to Fusion. I'm glad we made it there. Thanks for the poke, Rob.
That's funny.
Yeah. Anyway, I thought I would very briefly just bring up a couple. This book is so good. Everybody should go read it. We could almost just like read the book out loud on the podcast.
Yeah, just for.
It'd be funny if we had a separate podcast. It was just
us reading books.
I
think the authors might have something to say.
They might have some issues with that. Yeah. The author was bringing up the point that the ideal of flow in production is like in no way new. And that has been pursued on and off again for centuries. And some examples that I found very interesting was during the mid 1500s, The Venetian arsenal developed a system for mass production of warships and could produce nearly one ship a day with standardized parts on a sequential production line basis.
That's so wild.
Yeah, and we're just like, we assume that this is like so revolutionary.
Yeah.
And then like, I think it's like opening our minds to where this is, like where these concepts flow to. And that's set in the 1700s. Oliver Evans developed a sequence of machines and conveyance devices that connected all parts of the flour milling process into one continuous system. And
Very cool.
We walk into an old flour mill and kind of take it for granted that like you put flour, like grain in at the top and it flows down a chute into the, but that's not always how it was, right? At some point, like these were separate processes that people, like put it here into a bag and then they picked up the bag and dumped it into the thing. And, and then often an example of the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts in the 1820s for making gun stocks, which is pretty, I think, widely quoted and used example. And then they brought up some kind of interesting things outside of industry where we, like the example of in the 19th century, if you wanted to hear Strauss play a waltz, you had to invite him to your court. And later we could go buy records and CDs, and today you just download it from the internet, and it's like speeding up the flow of whatever it is to the end consumer, like kind of carries through all these different aspects of life.
Interesting.
Which I thought was just kind of curious.
Yeah. On the gun stocks topic, I think I mentioned on the podcast, but there's a museum called the American Precision Museum. I think it's in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And they have one of those machines. Kind of very simple.
Is it the same, like, are gun stocks still made basically that same way?
That's a good question. I bet they are.
Like with a pattern and a follower. And
yeah, it's kind of, that and like axe handles and bats, I bet. Although at this point, like, you don't need a follower. You can have it follow G-code, I think is kind of
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess not mass production of gun stocks, but I was thinking about, there was a old machinist guy in the town where I live, and I went into his basement one time, and he had built a gun stock replicator with a router and a follower. And
yeah, they're pretty simple.
Yeah.
It's funny to me when sometimes I feel like the CNC options aren't as fast as the mechanical stuff, but I don't think that's inherent. I think it's just like, I don't know.
I mean, it's the classic optimization versus
versatility. Yeah, for sure. I've been frustrated a little programming automation that I don't have like two parallel streams in G-code, because when the CNC is doing two things at once, like going to get a part or dropping off a part, but also clearing the vise.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, I don't need those to happen sequentially.
You need a Swiss fork. Mill.
Yeah, a Swiss mill, exactly. Yeah. A couple interesting things. I had posted on Instagram a little while ago about how we had talked about it on the podcast. We thought we needed a second milling machine.
Yeah.
Turns out we just needed to shrink our batch sizes. And so someone reached out, and somehow I missed it, but I just found this message. Someone reached out basically saying like, that takes a lot of, many companies don't realize the difference between cycle time and takt time.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really interesting framing, because basically the issue is like cycle time is how quickly can you make it. Takt time is what's your average time per part being ordered from your production line. And if your
how cycle time is how quickly can you make it on a particular process, or even the process is stacked up but not accounting for all of the other delays within the global process.
So if you have a really fast cycle time, that sounds like it's a win, and most people I think chase cycle time. But if it is way out of sync with your takt time, then you run into issues. So we were making parts quickly, but if you're making part A for a full day and then part B for a full day, but you run out of part A on day 2, you really need to do part A for half the day and part B for half the day.
Mm-hmm.
So if you went to an ice cream stand and you said, I want chocolate and vanilla, and they said, well, today we only have vanilla. It's kind of that. Like they need to do 2 side by side, you know, switch back and forth and making one and then the other, or have 2 machines that like you have to match demand. You can't just make a lot of something at times when it's convenient or something.
Yeah. Or like, I mean, I think a simpler, like, I think that is very much like the definition. But it can also just, I think, be like maybe an in-between concept for a lot of people is thinking through the entire process and how long it takes to make a completed unit, not just one aspect of the process that you can do really fast.
Yeah. So like you don't want, actually they had this problem in World War II making B-29s, and the Army was getting reports of these different facilities completing airplanes. And then they're like, okay, we're paying for these airplanes, but they're not showing up. Like, where are they? They're being marked complete, but we haven't received them. And so Big Bill Knutson went on a tour and found that they were being marked complete out on the runway, often without engines installed, often with like wooden tires.
Oh my God.
Like, and wheels, because there wasn't enough rubber to make the tires. So they were like, well, we don't have the materials, but we've done the parts we can do, so we're just going to mark them complete. And so they added a rule that you can't mark anything complete until it's complete.
Odd concept.
Yeah. Like until it was test flown or something, and
interesting,
and passed like the test flight. But yeah, so like making most of the airplane very well was not actually very useful in fighting Nazis, right? You need the full airplane.
Yeah. Interesting.
Anyway, so that I thought that was a useful framing of like takt time versus cycle time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of have things all over the map, so unfortunately we're going to be jumping around a little bit.
Yeah.
So one thing another thing, rationalize your production. I feel like for a long time I struggled with this concept reading it in books. I was like, I don't know what that means at all. I know we've talked about it on the podcast before, but I just like once it clicked, I just feel like it's so useful. So we're dealing with an issue. Well, it's not really an issue. It's a big improvement. The one we've sort of been cranking on, which we'll get to next episode, but has to do with our sewing machine. And that process has not a high defect rate, but like
a measurable one.
Yeah, like we end up with defects, not super infrequently. And it's sort of the culmination of quite a bit of labor.
Yeah.
That said, the whole thing isn't scrapped, but you end up having to cut the webbing back off because the stitching doesn't look good or whatever, right? And so it is tempting, I think, very tempting often to kind of optimize for one aspect of a thing. Like in this case, maybe cycle time. It's like, oh, how quickly can we make a strap? But I think it's then easy to forget about your scrap rate and amortize that time back into your process. So you might say, okay, well, we can make, like when everything's going really well, we can make one every 10 seconds. Oh, wow. If we change this, we can get it down to 9 seconds. But if your scrap rate goes up slightly in doing that, there's a very good chance that if you take all the time, like the 9 seconds that go into a scrap rate, into a scrap part, and amortize that over the other parts, you might be back over the 10 seconds, in which case, like if you rationalize that, it's not a good move. Similarly, I feel like, COVID, there was all the supply chain issues, and then post-COVID, a lot of industries sort of overshot in terms of restocking. And so you ended up with all these flash sales, or like, people putting these on big sale. And I'm sure this is something people are thinking about, but when people make the choice to like move to a bigger manufacturer or place larger orders, I feel like what they're looking at in the time of making that decision is their cost of goods. Yeah. It's like, oh, wow, we can get our, our margin up a little bit by dropping our costs if we just order more stuff.
Yeah.
Which sounds great. But then if let's say you have 15% of that inventory hanging and you're like, wow, we really need to move this inventory, whether that's a slowdown or whatever, and you sell it at you sell it at cost or you sell it slightly above cost, right? If you give a big sale, you really want to take all of that inventory and divide your total revenue by your inventory that you ordered and just see what your actual selling cost is. Because I'm just kind of curious, like, it seems like there would be seems like it could be very helpful for people in terms of cash flow and in terms of just flexibility to sort of approach it as a hybrid thing of like, we're not either placing a massive order or a small order. It's like, how can we place like big orders for the stuff we're very, very confident if you do have to like offshore or work with how can we place really big orders, but then also sort of fill in with JIT production?
Yeah.
And I just think like if you looked at the full picture of the company, I think it's really easy in all of this, like really everything. And this is something that's hammered home in all these books, is like global optimum versus local optimum. And it's just really easy to get stuck in, I think, looking at like your theoretical cost of goods on a spreadsheet or your theoretical cycle time without remembering like process reliability and all that.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of interesting during the COVID bike boom, it was so hard to get parts.
Yeah.
And the word on the street was like Shimano. So like for those of you not familiar with the bike industry, there's kind of two main players of the like drivetrain and brake component, mostly drivetrain manufacturers. The SRAM, which is American/German sort of, and then Shimano, which is Japanese. And word on the street was that like SRAM was ramping their production like crazy, and Shimano was just like, nope, we're gonna keep it even with what we've done in the past. We're not anticipating this like continuing. And I'm curious, I don't have any information, but if anybody who's in the industry knows, I'm kind of curious how that played out and whether kind of SRAM was able to played that right, basically.
Yeah.
And was able to clear all the inventory and production that they made and then ramp back down as the bust has come.
Right.
Or if at the end of the day, I think a lot of people were frustrated with Shimano. So, customer satisfaction is a real thing that matters. Being like, we can't get your stuff, we need your stuff, like turned a lot of people off.
Right.
So I'm curious how that plays out in the long term.
Interesting.
But yeah, I'm curious what the financial side, like downstream effects were of those varying approaches.
Right.
Because it was notably different.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be interesting to know. I mean, across so many industries, I definitely saw a number of different ways of going about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was that.
Do we want to have that cash flow talk? Just kind of an interesting. It's kind of in the same vein a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm preparing for moving my shop, and I was going back and forth on whether we could really afford to do it and how we were going to kind of juggle the move time wise and cash flow wise.
Yeah.
And through some good discussions with you and a couple other people, I think I had this feeling like we have to get into this new space to make it pay for itself. And it was cool to kind of reframe that and step back and be like, okay, we have a quote unquote money making machine in our current spot that functions. So there's actually sort of an adverse incentive, as you said, to stop that machine.
Right.
In order to move it. And there is a very good incentive to, even though this space is being paid, this new space is being paid for. I mean, my situation's a little different in that I don't pay for my current space. So,
but even if you did per square foot, it's a massive jump.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like,
And so it was interesting to be like, okay, it might actually be more beneficial to be paying for this space, keeping it empty, and waiting for the opportune time to move versus pressuring ourselves to move as quickly as possible to quote unquote make the space pay for itself.
Right. Like, I'm paying for this thing, I should be using it.
Yeah.
But really using it actually disrupts the cash flow.
Yeah.
And I think it's somewhat unique in moving shops that a big jump in cash like outlay or one line item, depends on your situation, corresponds with a complete disassembly of your shop and of your business in a funny way.
Well, it's also like a unique sort of quote unquote investment in that the immediate effects of a larger shop are not immediately more revenue.
No, in fact, it's immediately a lot less revenue, at least for like 3 days of moving.
At least
at the
for
very
moving.
least.
Yeah, but then
and then it's going to take like a while to make use of that space.
Yeah, to really see the effects.
Yeah, so I thought it might be just worth putting that out there because I think a lot of us are like contemplating a move or maybe going to move, and I thought it was like I felt like it took a while of sort of talking through the actual constraints of the problem to be like, wait a second. Moving is bad. Like, yes, you should pay for this space, but don't move into it.
Yeah.
Which is just a weird concept.
Kind of the part of the background, I guess, is in our particular area, space is extremely limited. So I can't really be like, I'm just going to wait until, I'm going to plan for moving in 6 months and I'm going to, build up cash. And like, as soon as I'm ready, I'm going to find the spot and we're going to move. It's like this spot came available. Is a bit of a unicorn. If I didn't jump on it, it could be another year or 2 years before something of similar sort of.
It's pretty ideal.
It's pretty ideal in all the ways. So that's the kind of background on why I chose to go for it, even though it was from all perspectives, a bad moment.
Right. I think, though, it's applicable to a lot of things now that I'm thinking about it. Like, if you're a cabinet shop and you want to buy a new table saw, and that's a big investment and a kind of a cash flow crunch, if your production flows with your current saw, like, I could see a similar thing where it's like, buy the saw, stick it in the corner. Once you're through sort of some of this paying work that just flows through your shop in its current state, take the 3 days to, like, get it in place, learn the tool, like, all the jigs that worked on the old saw, get them all working. Like, a lot of these things, I think we underestimate how disruptive anything new is. And when you spend a bunch of money on something, you kind of want to make use of it. But I think that the interesting thing is it often, if paying for it is a struggle and you have a business that generates profit, hopefully, then leaving your business alone to help bridge that can be helpful. So we covered rationalize your production. Okay, so this is something I've sort of been struggling with bigger improvements and projects in general, is the concept of production leveling versus single piece flow, and minimizing WIP. So there's this idea that, like, if you're working on a project, like we've talked about this before, the worst improvement is like a half-done improvement because you have invested time and money and you're not getting any benefit. So there's a concept of like, that's work in
which sounds exactly like what we just talked about.
Yeah, true.
So it's fine sometimes.
This
is why it's confusing.
So the concept is sort of like, just get the thing fully finished and then you can realize gains from it sooner. You have less time and money invested in things that aren't benefiting the company, essentially. And this is like, there's examples, I think, in the Toyota way of, I forget if it's that book, but of like a transmission, no, it was an exhaust design firm that had like a turn time of like doing analysis. Their analysis department was the bottleneck in their company. Maybe it was in...
I don't think it's in the Toyota way.
Okay.
I'm not...
trying to think which book it is. Anyway, the constraint, the bottleneck was their analysis branch of the exhaust systems. And so sort of counterintuitively, they found that limiting the project for each engineer to like 3 got higher throughput and like higher total throughput like in the year, but also much faster turn time. And so that is the concept of WIP, of like reducing WIP, and single piece flow is just like before starting the next thing, just finish the last thing. But there's also a concept of production leveling, which is sort of like contradictory in that if I'm spending my time part of the day on production and part of the day design, and maybe this is just like a weird situation that like Toyota doesn't really have, because I think the more I'm learning about their corporate structure, they have production workers and then they have like the line manager whose job is basically improvements, right? Like, and supporting the production workers. But it's not like they're asking their production workers like, hey, you should make a bunch of improvements while doing production. It seems like they generate production ideas, and if there's an issue, they work on improvements. I don't really know. Like, I'm definitely not an authority on how they're structuring things, but I don't know that it's always applicable, but it's definitely applicable to me, and I think a lot of other companies, which is like, on one hand, I can take a few days to like just work, like put my head down and just work really hard on like designing a new fixture or a new automation tool or something, and then like, you know, it takes a few days to get it running and everything. Right. And that's how I did the gripper. Like when we first implemented the gripper, I was like, okay, this, like our production fixture for 1-inch cams doesn't work. Instead of fixing it, because it was damaged, instead of fixing it, I'm just gonna like get this thing running on the gripper. And it took me like I don't know 4 days or something of like pretty steady work to just get that done. But then there's this big spike in production, and so it really messes with production leveling to put all that time into one particular thing, instead of saying like, okay, for the first hour of the day I'm going to do improvements, and then for like hour 2 through 5 I'm going to work on production, and then I'm going to answer some email, like do a little bit of everything every day, instead of like, no, today like I'm just focusing on this one thing. I don't know how, like, I don't know what the answer is. I think it's one of those things of like, kind of depends, but I don't know. It's something I've sort of been struggling with, because it feels like damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of a thing.
I think to me, it strikes me as a largely a small business problem of,
well, here we are.
one person doing too many things.
For sure. Things. But I don't think, I mean, what would a small company, like up to what size do you think this would be? I would imagine it's like a lot of the companies in the US would have a sort of... I mean, it's not just small company. Like even working at some of my previous jobs at big organizations, it was like you have a role at that organization. And then there's all these other like side-ish projects that's like sort of speculative, or sort of like, oh, you know, we should look into this. Maybe that's a good... And it's sort of like, I could just take 3 days to do a deep dive on this topic and sort of shirk my responsibilities on all fronts. Which I feel like sometimes is just what you need to do, because there are some things you just need to like get your head in the game, like read a bunch of stuff, open like 300 tabs on your browser. And anyway, so I think it is sort of a struggle. I don't know if there's like...
I'm not sure.
Analytical way to sort of draw bounds of like how to approach it or how to think about it. I'm sure there's probably like 5 ways to think about it. And
I want to believe that there's a scale and maybe this is just too big of a scale, but there's a scale at which you kind of like assign a person the role of handling those things, and they kind of do them in sequence as they're needed, and you kind of like leave them available for that and don't try and
imagine if I, in a dream world, hired you to do that in my shop. You would have the same issue of like, hey Devin, we need to program this part on the CNC, we need to, or maybe that's too in the weeds, but like we need to improve everything right now. So it's like, do you do 7 things? No. Do you do... I mean, okay, no, maybe you're right, because in that case, we know, or seemingly, you do one thing at a time, or like 3 things at a time, and that's it. And until one is done, you don't add another. And that's this idea of a whip board.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe you're right. So it doesn't then directly interfere with the concept of production leveling because you are not in a production role.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
and I
here I am having a small business problem, which I anticipate will continue for a number of years.
And I could see it being like, okay, so maybe you don't keep this person busy 100% of the time, but it ends up being more beneficial overall because production doesn't get disrupted. And so it's okay to have this person idle occasionally when there's no improvement projects.
On that vein, I actually had a thought, sort of a mental experiment. If you have good confidence that improvements pay for themselves, one would think that that both of us, each of us, could hire someone full-time to work on improvements. And that might be the best hire we can make. Yeah. Now,
I kind of want to be that person. I think that's
100%
my vision for my
we're
business.
Doing this podcast. I think,
it would be like hire somebody to do the business side, hire somebody to do the programming side, and then I just work on process.
Yeah, I agree.
Sounds
but
delightful.
It feels even so. Then that would. I guess what I'm sort of saying is like, if you hire another person that adds whatever percentage to your labor pool, but theoretically, if you lean out processes, you're going to shave 50% off of time in the process. And so it seems like a much more impactful thing rather than hiring more people to lean out those processes. I'm sort of on this fence thinking about like growing the company. And I think the more you grow it, the more, we've talked about this, but like, cash flow becomes very real.
Yeah.
In a way that I don't know. I'm always back and forth on like, do I just focus on getting processes where we want them to be? Like so far we've grown production by, well, more than 500% since, I mean, it's sort of an unfair benchmark.
Started at 0. Actually,
well, infinity in that case. No, but just like, I remember early on, I could do 100 a week. And now we can easily do 500 a week.
Yeah.
And that has mostly to do with process improvement. And so like we could just keep on that trajectory. I don't know. It's tough.
I mean, your gains will get smaller.
Maybe we could majorly improve our production if we just.
But without people?
Yeah, I think so.
Huh. I mean, at some point there's diminishing returns.
Yeah.
In all things.
Yeah, like on each process. If you take a really lean process and you try to make it more lean.
Yeah.
Yeah. The returns diminish.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So
that's some of the stuff I've been thinking about.
Might be a good place to wrap up for
sure.
For today. Thank you all for listening. We will catch you around. You can find me at Lycan_MFG on Instagram and LycanPrecision.com on the internet.
And you can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram and at austeremfg.com. And the podcast is at Incremental CI on Instagram. And we don't actually have a website for it, but I was thinking maybe we should. A lot of people have been asking about a reading list. So, yeah, maybe we make that happen. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you next episode.